So we're going to go through the basics, the funding limit and how to find that, basic cost principles, what's allowable, and then the different budget components. So the first thing we have to start with is reading the FOA, or the specific solicitation. It's called different things according to different agencies. And the answer to where you're going to find the budget limit in the FOA depends. Sometimes it's very clear, like in this NSF example, we can see that this fellowship is for $90,000 per year per fellowship. In this NIH example, the answer is not so clear. It depends on which program within this whole solicitation you're applying for. And then also in this solicitation, we can see that rather than allowing the full F&A that we normally get, and we'll talk about all of that in a little bit, they're only allowing 8%. So before you even start building your budget, thinking about what you might want to put in your budget, really before you even start making plans for your project, you need to know how much you're allowed to spend and the spending limitations. And all of that is going to be in either the solicitation or in the guide, like the HAP guide for NSF, and then NIH, DOE, they all have their own guides as far as what's allowed. Okay. The basic cost principles for any project, any grant, is the expense allowable? So does the sponsor allow this expense? And does the government allow this expense? The second thing we need to look at is it allocable? So that's great that they'll allow us to buy paper, but can we necessarily say that 5 sheets of paper went towards this project and cost that expense towards the project? Probably not. So anything that we charge to the grant needs to be allocable. So keep that in mind when you're making your budget. It also needs to be reasonable. And reasonable is a very loose term. So the definition is, would a prudent person consider the cost to be reasonable and the expense to be necessary to the completion of the project? Have good faith efforts been made to find multiple quotes with vendors who have no vested interest in the outcome of the project? Then are the expenses consistently treated? So if we typically would include an expense in our F&A, but think, hey, maybe because we have a little bit of budget left, we're going to go ahead and charge that to the project, that's not treating it consistently. So do those 4 cost principles make sense? Do you have any questions about those? So now that we've done a very quick overview of the cost principles, we're going to go into building our budget, and we'll talk more about those cost principles as we do so. So the first thing that we need to start whenever we build our budget is make sure that we have the F&A costs correct, that percentage correct. Baylor's federally negotiated rate is 40%, but if you're working with the foundation, they may not recognize that. Sometimes it's 0, and it could be anywhere between 0 and 40%. So we need to have that number right before we start building our budget, because that number can eat away at the budget you have available to you. So indirect costs are sometimes called indirect costs, IDC, F&A. It all means the same thing. It's the costs that are incurred for common or joint objectives and cannot be readily and specifically charged to a project. So it include departmental accounting and clerical support. It includes my time. I don't have to, write down each minute I spend for each project. It can include network support, like our IT department, equipment depreciation, our lights, our air conditioning, all of that kind of stuff is included in our F&A.
Hey, Brandy, what does NTDC mean?
That's a great question. So whenever we are making a budget with NIH, NSF, Department of Education, Department of Defense, we charge modified total direct costs. And that can have a big impact on your budget as well, because some sponsors charge total direct costs. So total direct costs are just that. These are our total direct costs. We're going to take 40% of that. That's our F&A. For modified total direct costs, Things like participant support do not count. We remove that expense entirely. Equipment, we remove that expense entirely when we're calculating the F&A. Whenever we're looking at subawards, for each subaward, whether you have 1 or 30, we only take that 40% on the first $25,000. Everything over that is not burdened with F&A. Does that make sense? Okay.
I know 40 is relatively low for universities.
It is.
When I was at A&M, I want to say it was almost 60% or really close to that.
Yes, that's about what it is right now. It's close to 60%. I think a little bit over. 50, 51 is pretty common. So another thing to note is that for NIH, they usually give a funding limit for direct costs, and then your indirect costs are above and beyond that. So whenever you're looking at the R15, you have a $300,000 budget, and that is only for your direct costs. And then I don't want to say you're not penalized for whatever your F&A rate is, but basically that's it. That's money above and beyond. For NSF, for most solicitations, your dollar limit is your dollar limit, and it includes everything. So your total direct costs and your F&A are included in that one lump sum. So one of the biggest expenses, other than equipment, on our projects is personnel. Whenever we are calculating effort on a project, we usually talk in person months. So out of the 12 months, out of your 10-month contract, whatever time period your contract is for, how much of that time are you going to be spending on this project? So the way we calculate your base salary or PI's base salary, at Baylor we have 10-month contracts. Very few people have 12-month contracts. So we take basically the monthly rate for those 10 months, and we're going to multiply it by 12. Because you have up to 12 months, or PIs do, postdocs are paid on a 12-month contract already. But the typical PI is going to have 12 months that they can charge to a project or get paid for. And so that's called our annualized salary, whenever we take that monthly salary and we multiply it out by 12 months. And this is our institutional based salary, or IBS. NSF limits you to 2-person months for PIs, and that is across all of your projects. So if you have 2 projects or 5 projects, you're only allowed to have 2-person months unless you justify that, unless you justify the need for more. So if you have projects already that put you at 2-person months effort, and you are proposing another NSF project that's going to give you another month, you have to justify how you're going to be able to spend more than 2 months devoted to your research. NIH does not have a person month cap, they have a salary cap. So if you make close to $200,000 a year, actually it's $220,000 when you annualize it, NSF will pay up to that amount, like per your percentage of effort. So it's not just they're going to pay up to $200,000. You have to take that $200,000 and divide it by 12, and that's how much per month they'll pay. So does that make sense? It's kind of a tricky concept. And then again, you have to read through your funding opportunity announcement. Some of the sponsors will require that a certain amount of money is spent on student support. ACS, the American Chemical Society, a certain amount of the entire project, I believe it's 60%, has to be spent on student support. So be sure you're keeping that in mind. And then others have objectives that are specifically to employ, undergraduate students or graduate students. So when we're building our budget, we need to be sure we're budgeting for their salary as well. So very quickly, I want to walk you through the slides. This bottom part, this screenshot, is of the Baylor budget template that we currently use. probably won't have this around for much longer. But just to show you, when we're budgeting, we're not budgeting in dollars, we're budgeting in person amounts. And this is a little bit older because then the NIH salary cap was only 192. And we can turn that on and off. Thankfully, our budget template automatically calculates that for us. So please don't try to do all this by yourself and recreate the wheel. Come to your URA early, let us help you, let us plug it into this tool that people have spent hundreds of hours creating so that we can give you an accurate number. And then we can also budget our students and the postdocs down here. Actually, most of your names should be in there so we can capture your exact salary whenever we're doing budgeting the postdoc. And then on the next page, we have a breakdown of the effort. So we can look at exactly how much effort each person is putting on the project. And effort is a whole separate discussion. But basically, you need to just think about how much time it's going to take you to complete that project. So as you're writing your proposal, as you're planning what meetings you're going to have, you need to think about how many hours per week are you going to be spending on that project so that you can budget your effort appropriately, or maybe scale back your project if you're not going to have enough effort to complete that.
What does FTE mean?
Faculty time and effort. Full-time effort. Full-time effort. Okay. So we can have effort that is both paid by the sponsor and that is cost shared, and we're going to talk about cost share more in a minute. And so our budget template does break that down for us.
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay, so what is cost share? Cost sharing is the portion of the total sponsor project's costs that the sponsor does not pay. So Baylor always cost shares on every single project because Baylor pays the tuition for graduate students, and they pay the insurance stipend for graduate students. So Baylor always cost shares, and that's voluntary cost share, voluntary uncommitted. We pay it, we don't have to record it, we don't have to report it to the sponsor. So that would be voluntary uncommitted. Excuse me. Whenever we have a faculty member who's over that salary cap, that's voluntary cost sharing. We have to pay that person their full salary, but we're not going to, penalize them because they're applying to NIH that has a salary cap. Voluntary committed would be those times whenever we have sponsors, especially foundations, that want to know that we are committing a certain amount of money or effort or just something to the project, but we still don't have to record it and we don't have to report it to them, but we just have to put in our budget justification and in our proposal that we will have graduate students working on that that will be paying their tuition, things like that. Mandatory cost sharing. We can have that with foundations also. We have it a lot with larger grants, like the MRI grant will have mandatory cost share. Any large center, the government will give us a certain amount of cost share. Stacy and Virginia, do y'all have anything to add to that? I know that y'all are usually some of the first ones to see that and try to figure out how that's going to be managed.
For example, if you're working on the NSF major research instrumentation, the MRI grant, where you're trying to acquire a piece of instrumentation through a grant, it requires a 30% cost share. And so just so you know how that process goes, the department, the college, the VPR, the Vice Provost of Research Office, they all commit money to meet that 30%. So it's not just usually multiple people handling that.
Okay, so one of the next sections we'll talk about is travel, just because that's the way it flows in our budget template. So for someone to travel on the project, they must be listed as personnel. So we can't have random people traveling with us. You can't invite your colleague just because it would benefit them to go. It has to be someone that was listed in the project, and it has to benefit the project. So common reasons to travel might be sponsor meetings, to complete project objectives, to disseminate information like at conferences, or sometimes sponsor meetings, or possibly to find collaborators.
So on that, if you have a grant that's funding graduate students, maybe one, maybe multiple, do they need to be listed to travel? Because you don't always have them when you write the grant, and you don't always include their name, especially if they haven't committed or something like that.
Right, so you don't have to have their names at the time you propose, but you do need to propose support for graduate students. If the department is cost sharing those graduate students, then we need to be sure that we're addressing that in your facilities page. If it's NSF, if it's NIH, it would still go with personnel, I believe.
The grad student,
Mhm.
right? Okay.
That they're going to be working on the project, but we're not asking for any funding for them.
Right. Okay. No,
Yeah, so you don't have to list their names, the names of graduate students.
Okay.
But at the time they travel, we should be showing that they're working on the grant by charging some of their salary to the project, whether it's the actual sponsored sponsor budget or whether it's the internal budget.
Okay.
And then whenever we're budgeting, we can put a lump sum in there, but most sponsors prefer that we put a breakdown of the costs so they can make sure that those are reasonable. And whenever we do that breakdown, some of the sponsors will require us to use the GSA rates, and that's the standard government rates. They take a poll, how much does it cost to get a hotel room on average in San Francisco in June? So they've done all that work. They have all of that out there for us on a website, and it's easy to find. They also have the per diem. You either have to use Baylor's per diem or the GSA per diem. So usually the GSA per diem is going to be higher, like if you're in a larger city. If you're in New Mexico, it's probably going to be a little bit lower, so you might want to go with the Baylor rate. And then also, whenever you're budgeting for your travel, be sure that you have mileage in there. If you think you're going to have to drive to Dallas, we need to be sure you have parking, Uber fees for getting around once you get wherever you're going, and then also your conference registration. Some of those are quite expensive. Okay, equipment. Does anyone have questions on travel before we move on to equipment? Okay, so equipment per NSF is defined as a piece of non-expendable, tangible personal property that has a useful life of more than 1 year and an acquisition cost of $5,000 or more per unit. So, for example, we just received an award where someone is building a video wall. So each of those TVs for the video wall is under $5,000, but because they are going to work together as a unit, it goes under equipment. And it's not just the cost of the TVs, it's also the delivery and the installation. So anything that's going to go into making that unit function adds up together. And if it's over more than $5,000 and has a life expectancy of more than a year, then we're going to put that in equipment. So the benefit to making sure we get that right is that you save a little bit of money in F&A if it does qualify for equipment. If you put in an equipment and it shouldn't have been there, then that's going to cause extra F&A to be charged to your project at the time of, that you buy that equipment. So you're going to be a little bit overspent. And then the other thing to note is that each contract contains clauses to address the ownership of the equipment at the end of the project. I know DoD says that, hey, you can keep that, but we might ask to come use that. So be sure you're keeping that in mind. For some of them, the university owns it. For others, we have to pack it up and ship it back to the sponsor. All right. Next up is contracted services. So contracted services can be with an individual or it can be with a company. Typically, these are the expenses that are going to be more than I think $3,500 is our threshold. So if you have someone who is going to be performing services for you, and that cost is going to go over $3,500, then you're going to have to work with procurement to set up a contract, and then with your office manager to set up a PO so that we can get that person paid. So that's going to go in our contracted services line. We also have research services, and those are our centers on campus, like our mass spec, the mass spec center. And then we have the statistical science center. I know there's a handful of others on campus that are commonly used. So one of the common mistakes whenever you're creating a budget is whether someone should be a contracted service or a subaward. And again, the difference is that, budgeting wise, the difference is that for the cost over $25,000, we're not going to charge F&A on that amount of money. So if the whole contracted service is $100,000, if it's a contracted service, we're going to charge 40% on the full $100,000. If it's a subaward, we're going to charge 40% on the first $25,000, and then the $75,000 would be unburdened. So the differences are if they're a subcontractor, subrecipient, they're going to have a say in the outcome of the project. So they're going to be making decisions that are going to directly affect the outcome of the project. They are not just performing a service for you, and they are responsible for making sure that all of the funding they receive is used according to federal, rules and regulations. If they're a subcontract, they're performing a service for you that they would provide for anyone else. So it might be just running lab samples. It might be, providing a service to your participants, something that anyone from the public can come request that they do. They are not making programmatic decisions for you. Okay, another thing to note whenever you are entering into a subaward agreement, or you're working with, a colleague at another university, and you're trying to decide who should be the lead, whoever is going to have more of the budget should be the lead organization. So if they have a certain center on their campus that they're going to use, and that's going to cause them to suck up more of the budget, or maybe they just have more PIs on their campus, then they should be the lead. If Baylor is going to have more of the budget, then we should be the lead. Okay, another common misconception, common mistake is the difference between participant support and research subject incentives. So participants are people who are going to benefit from being in your project. These are typically the summer camps, or even just a one-day seminar. They're coming here to receive a benefit from whatever you're giving. The costs paid are on behalf of the participants. So it could be like a conference registration fee. It could be meals. You can pay for their travel, and you can give them a stipend for your time. Usually we see participant support in NSF projects. Research subject incentives are more common in NIH projects. The benefit is to the science. We are observing them, we're asking them to fill out a survey. They might watch a video and fill out a survey. They may receive some small benefit, but it's minimal and it's not guaranteed. So whenever we're giving a gift card, $20 gift card if you'll come to this meeting, if you'll fill out this survey, those are research subject incentives. Again, the reason we need to be clear on that when we're proposing is that participant support is not burdened with F&A, research subject incentives are.
Yes, please, I have a question here. Brandy, hi, sorry.
Hey, how are
you? Can hear me? Hi. I wanted to ask you, like from the previous slide with participant support and research subject, is there an option where you can have a participant and a research subject? Say I prepare like a boot camp or summer camp, and the people that is attending is also going to maybe, I don't know, annotate some data or something. Like they are going to learn, but at the same time they are going to like we are going to kind of extract information from them?
Occasionally you will, but for the most part, because the programs for NSF are geared more towards participants, and the NIH programs are geared more towards research subjects, it wouldn't be common. But it could happen depending on the type of camp you're putting on and if you need research subjects for that camp. So it could be possible that you do have participants that you're training to do, something. And then sometime during that training, you do need participants to come in and, complete a survey or perform a task or whatever for you that you need in order to complete that camp or training session.
So I will have to call them participants.
So then you could have both. You could have the participants who are learning how to do whatever it is, and then the subjects that are that you're giving like a small stipend or not a stipend, like a gift card or a small payment to come in and be involved in your study.
Okay. So I could say that I'm going to benefit these participants with these stipends, like to have them in both categories and say what I'm going to spend in each type.
Yes. So whenever you get to that point, just come find me and we'll talk it through and make sure that everyone's in the right category.
Right. Thank you.
No problem. That's a great question. All right. Are there any other questions about participant support or research subjects? Materials and supplies is a very broad category. For NIH, they typically do want you to, if you're going to have an expense that's over $1,000, they do want you to itemize that. Like if you need a certain number of test kits, they want you to itemize how much they are and how many you're buying. If each category is less than $1,000, we don't have to itemize that. It's easiest on all of us if you are as detailed but general as possible when you're writing your budget justification for that. So when you're writing your budget justification, you can say may include things such as, and we'll list out the things you might include, but you don't have to put an exact dollar amount to each thing. So these are the things that you can say, I ordered, 500 pipettes for this project, and you can use those reasonably on that project. Or maybe minor equipment, like if you need a specific hard drive, or if you can't borrow the cameras or microphones you need from the library, you may need to purchase those. So all of those type of things would go under the materials and supplies. So this is, I think, one of the hardest things to budget for because people are either way over or way under. So again, as you're writing your proposal and you're thinking about what you're going to need, keep a running list of what all you're going to have to buy in order to complete that. And I should note, computers are tricky. Typically, computers fall under materials and supplies. They are allowable, but under certain circumstances. If you have an entire computer lab at your disposal, then you can't buy a laptop just because you want to buy a laptop. If you are going out into the field and you need to take your laptop with you, or if you're going out in the field or out in the community to do community outreach, then we can buy laptops or tablets in order to conduct that, because you can't pick up and carry your desktop with you to do that. Also, basic computers, whether laptops or desktops, are included in the F&A because we use them for more than just one project or another. So typically, computers are not allowed. They can be in certain circumstances. If you need a supercomputer for something, then of course that would be allowable, and we need to be sure that we justify that in the budget justification. And then some computers, like workstations, would fall into the equipment category if they're over $5,000. And of course, they will have a year life of more than a year. I mean, a life of more than a year. Other costs to consider are publication fees. The publication fees can range from $2,800 to $3,000 as an average. They can be $1,000, they can be $10,000. So be sure that you know who you're going to submit your publications to, and that you know how much that's going to cost you. Also, be sure you're talking with your program officer and you know what the expectations are for the sponsor you're submitting to. Because some of them do expect you to submit publications every year of your 5-year project. Others maybe just the last 2 years. And then also broader impacts. I have a great visual that I can send all of you that goes into more detail about broader impacts. Because there are a lot of things to consider. The National Alliance for Broader Impacts recommends that 10% of the total project budget is allocated towards broader impacts. On campus, we do have the Mayborn Museum that has a fee schedule available for us to help with broader impacts. And then we do have some services available to us that we don't have to we don't have to pay for. So we just need to be sure that we're addressing that in the proposal if we're using the rooms on campus, so we don't have to pay for those things.
If you're working on broader impacts, please reach out to our office. We're standing up a new office to support this, and we're hiring someone that can do pre and post award activities for this. So just want to let everybody know, if you're working on an NSF grant or maybe another grant that requires some sort of science outreach, please reach out to our office.
Yes, for sure. It's not something to just leave until the end and write one sentence about. It's a major proposal component that you don't want to overlook or wait until the end to address.
And then right after the first of the year, we will have another one of these postdoc workshops focused on broader impacts. So it'll be in January.
Excellent.
I just wanted to point out, I'll put in the chat, there's already a website that Blake has put together that has a lot of information for broader impacts as well.
Very good. All right. So as soon as you know you're going to propose, you can reach out to your URA that's assigned to your department and start building your budget, or reach out with any budgeting questions. Maybe you've read through the FOA and it's just all Greek to you, and you need someone to help walk you through what's allowed and what's not allowed. So feel free to reach out to us, schedule a meeting, and we're more than happy to walk through all of that with you.
This was really helpful, Brandy. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us, and my email address is here. Feel free to reach out at any time.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here, and Brandy, thank you for presenting. And we'll go ahead and end the meeting. Everybody has a good rest of your day, and we will see you next time. Thanks.